Hello everyone, welcome to the next review. This is The Cathedral of Mist by Paul Willems, or Willems, a Belgian author. I've been interested in this book for some time. Unfortunately, I can't entirely recommend it. I only enjoyed maybe about 2 or 3 of the stories of the 6. There are 2 essays as well at the very end. A collection of short stories from the last of the great Francophone Belgian fantasists, first published in French in 1983. Distilled tales of distant journeys, buried memories and impossible architecture. Herein lies the experience of snowfall in a bed in the middle of a Finnish forest, the emotionally disturbed architectural plan for a palace of emptiness, the memory chambers that fuel the marvellous futility of the endeavour to write, and the beautiful woodland church, built of warm air currents and fog, scattering in storms and taking renewed shape at dusk, that gives this book its title. The Cathedral of Mist offers the sort of ethereal narrative that might have come from the pen of a sorrowful, distinctly Belgian Italo Calvino, and is accompanied by 2 meditative essays on reading and writing that fall in the tradition of Proust's On Reading and Julian Grach's Reading Writing. I felt that the literary quality, which I might have given more credit to in the past, hampered the book's enjoyment for me. A lot of these stories didn't feel as characterful and as meaningful as perhaps they should have. They rest almost entirely on very distinct but fleeting moments. The book itself is mostly just a collection of strange dreamlike events, very ephemeral and ethereal events. And of course, a book doesn't have to instill you with some meaningful and poignant character that you can connect to. But I just felt like there had to be something more than just these very dreamlike and plotless short stories. But the imagery, some of the imagery that is involved in these short stories is indeed quite wonderful. Requiem for Bread is the first short story, very short story indeed. And before I talk about the short story, I just want to present the darkly sombre and almost Beksinskian art here attached to each short story. This short story concerns death and primarily, or more importantly, more pertinently, forgetting. Bread should never be sliced, my grandmother says, it must be broken. And she takes the knife from my hands. I say nothing, silent in the presence of sacred words. I ask my cousin to explain. She is 12 years old. I trust her because of her eyes. Great big eyes with bluish whites and moist, glistening irises that each night paints anew with India ink. She considers. I feel like she is about to unveil one of the secrets of the world to me. One of those secrets guarded by dragons. She says, when a knife touches bread, the bread screams. It's a very evocative image. And this motif of the bread is carried on through the story as the narrator grows older. This short story really concerns death, and because of that I can't give too many spoilers. But it's a very melancholy story where the narrator, as I say, grows up and he wanders a coastal town or village called Ostend. And there's fantastic imagery everywhere in this short story. For example, when I went out in the morning, the town would just be emerging from the sea into which night had plunged it. It was streaming with water. Scraps of waves still clung to the sculpted facades of houses along the dike, with their marine motifs. Caryatids of salt bore aloft iron balconies wrought with seaweed patterns. The ending to this story is particularly poignant. It's very, very melancholy, but there's also it's a bittersweet ending, I think. Again, I don't want to say too much more than that. An Archbishop's Flight, I think I will skim over this one. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy it. It's described as, well, I did enjoy it, but that was more for the central image, the central event. It just didn't have, I didn't really connect with it, especially not with the characters involved. It concerns a man who buys a hat, and through this purchase he meets a count. The count then takes him to a forest, and there's a a lot of these stories are very much like magical realism, I think. I haven't read too much of magical realism, the literary category of magical realism, that is. I would consider my own stories to be magical realism, but of course there's a distinction there. The story itself is kind of plotless. It doesn't have much going for it. It's really for the central image. "I took you at your word," says the Count, laughing. "You said, to spend the night in the woods. So I had a bed made up in my prettiest forest, and he leaves me alone. Here I am, a bed in a clearing, a bed covered in white bear fur and supple blankets of elk. The sheets are of pure melusine, and the pillows of not black, trim goose down. The bed's 4 corners are topped with 4 brass globes. I am flooded with an exquisite warmth, for the Count has had heated stones placed in a great tray beneath the box spring." Cherepish was one that I've heard that people, it's unfortunate, I've heard that people didn't enjoy this one, and it's the same for me as well. Although the actual elements and themes of this story, I felt like they should have connected with me a lot more. I'm not sure what it was. It concerns death again. There are a lot of allusions to Greek mythology, specifically the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. There's also a lot of, again, it's a strange thing because there are mentions of, for example, myths being rehearsals for real life events or real life tragedies, and there are allusions and metaphors regarding entrances into deep spaces, for example, a cave. It concerns a man who meets a professor, I believe he is, called Hector, and they take a trip through Bulgaria, through the countryside, and they meet some monks. And I don't want to say too much more than that. It's a story about meaning. It's a story about longing and yearning. There are some interesting passages, but I don't know. I always give the author the benefit of the doubt, and I just think that I maybe wasn't in the right mood. It's a strange thing because there was a lot in there for me to potentially enjoy. In The Horse's Eye, again, this one was described. This is interesting. This one was described as being almost in the voice of Algernon Blackwood. It concerns this tribe called the Shvus. I believe that's how you pronounce it. These 2 men are talking on a plane heading to the Far East, and this is almost Blackwoodian in a sense because it concerns this tribe who erect these great stelae, and they have this ritual which is meant to reinvigorate words. The Shvush live on high plateaus, flat as the sea, a red sea, red from grass the colour of clotted blood. Not a single tree, just a plain. The wind carries a red scent of burnt grass. I lived there for over 2 years. At the end, I would have given an ear, my left foot and 4 fingers from my right hand to see a tree in leaf. But among the Shvus the plain is red. There they live, under felt tents with their horses. They raise monuments cut from black stone, some kind of marble of darkness, steles that look like silhouettes of standing men. When a word in the Shrew tongue shows signs of wear, they carve it into this marble they raise on the plain, beneath the sky and the wind. Men passing by give the word life again, recharge it with meaning. In this way their language stays strong. We have forests, but among the Shvus it is words that come into leaf. I have seen it. A rider stops, reads the signifier graven on the stele, pronounces it loudly, slowly, solemnly. Horse. Then he collects himself, gathers his strength and flings out, Horse, I give you the gallop in my soul. And in this way each man gives words a bit of his strength, like watering a tree. I believe the next story, The Palace of Emptiness, is considered almost a precursor to the final short story, The Cathedral of Mist. This is a darker story. It's definitely darker. I think that might be the darkest one here. It concerns an abusive relationship. It's kind of a codependence relationship. It's about an architect called Victor who creates, after some relationship troubles, what he calls his Palace of Mist, or Palaces of Mist. Victor did not lift a finger to find Micheline. He did not drink, for alcohol made him ill. He dulled himself with work. Back from the office at night, he would sit down at his drawing table. It was then that he drafted the plans for his Palaces of Emptiness. Weightless walkways were flung from dizzying heights. Thousands of slender steel ladders, as if propped against the sky, crisscrossed space in tightly encircled massive halls of air. For the palace was but emptiness, a hole in a labyrinth of lanes, a skyward precipice. The story was certainly dark, the implications of the story. The Cathedral of Mist was by far my favourite story. I think it's most people's favourite story as well. It also concerns an architect called V. One day, the architect V, who was very well known in Belgium before the First World War, grew tired of concrete and began to hate granite. He had noticed that stone, no matter what one did with stone, stubborn, it fulfilled only its destiny, which was to endure. It focused its immense, compact strength inward on itself, and pitted all its inertia against those who tried to distract it by moving or carving it. It loathed the verve church spires lent it, it abhorred all winged things, it suffered in the wind, and should one raise it to a temple pediment, it seized every chance it had to return to the earth. That is why columns topple, and even the most lasting monuments slowly sink into the soil, where stone reunites with its beloved darkness. The architect V renounced the use of stone. After years of meditation, he built a cathedral of mist. The principle was simple. The walls and steeple were made of fog instead of rock. As fog could be neither shaped nor mortared, construction was difficult. But the architect V knew that fog followed certain paths in the air as water follows a riverbed, and so, with the help of skillfully placed bellows, V founded currents of warm air that rose up like hollow walls and columns. These walls of warm air met in the shape of an arch 115 feet above the floor. Steam from a power station hidden underground followed the paths traced for it in the air. The architect V had chosen a magnificent setting, a clearing in the forest of Hoofholst, where oaks and beeches soared higher than the vault itself. Here the strange monument wavered gently in the still air. The architecture was at once hazy and precise, for though the steam never strayed from its bed of warm air, it was stirred by draughts and even by mere breathing. Visitors arriving on the woodland path would, upon rounding an old oak, suddenly see the mass of the cathedral rising before them. They would stop, astonished. After contemplating the monument at length, but unable to say why they were surprised, they would abruptly realize that the church had neither doors nor windows. Then they would circle the church a few times in search of a hidden entrance. The story essentially concerns a father who's really recounting his experience visiting the Cathedral of Mist to his son. This is one of the most melancholy stories I've ever read. Not much happens in it. It's just this contemplation of the idea, the symbol of the Cathedral of Mist. And I think in the introduction, the Cathedral of Mist is it's described at once as an object, but also a symbol. It wavers in and out of those two categories. It's so dreamlike that it's hard to put into words. The imagery is just fantastic. The great nave was worthy of admiration. 154 columns of mist flowed slowly upward, meeting in 7 keystones. There the vapour condensed into droplets of water that fell one by one at random. The goldsmith, Wolfers, had sculpted admirable irises to catch them on the ground. The deep blue blossoms bristled with slender steel fillets that each drop of water moved to sustain song. This music, which the fashion of the day deemed violet, replaced the bells the architect V had not been able to hang in the steeple of mist. But instead of taking wing like the sound of bells, this sound could be heard only by visitors, and travelled to a place very deep inside them. Like harness bells on that little horse pulling a sleigh through the night we bear within, it glided toward that farthest part of ourselves, beyond which music dies in sweet agony. I won't say much more than that. It's a fantastic read. Appended to the end of the book are 2 essays, one called Reading and one called Writing. Reading is really a William's personal feeling for the act of reading in all its facets. He talks about anecdotes and events that have happened in his life that connected to reading, the smell of books, the feel of books, places that he reads, trains for example. Writing, on the other hand, the second essay, again, as you can imagine, it concerns the act of writing, although of course it's not an instructive essay on the act or creation of the act of writing or the creation of stories. It's more a kind of a melancholy look back into William's past and what he thinks of writing in a very vague and sort of grand philosophical sense almost. The act of contemplation and waiting for ideas to come, things like this.